Kristen, and you're listening to Podcast and Amplify, a podcast for women entrepreneurs who want to amplify their voice and brand through podcasting and grow a wildly successful business. I'm the executive producer and host of 2 shows and an entrepreneur, and I love helping women grow their visibility, mindset, and business to the next level. Each week, I share tips on how to launch and leverage your podcast, and I'm bringing on the very best business leaders to give you advice on how to build your business empire. Let's amplify your voice and business. Welcome back to Podcast and Amplify. I'm here today to talk to you about how to write great interview questions for your podcast. So have you ever listened to an interview where the host asked the guest a question that made you think, that's exactly what I wanted to know? Or maybe they asked a question that you never would have thought to ask and you learned something that surprised you. So have you ever wondered how they got so good at asking the right questions? Well, if you want to offer your listeners a ton of value and keep them coming back for more, asking compelling, smart questions during your interviews is really important. While it does take practice, knowing how to approach the question writing process is super helpful. So today we're going to talk about my process for writing great interview questions. Okay, the first thing is you want to be in the know. The saying, you don't know what you don't know, really applies here. So the more informed you are about your guest and the topic you ask them to come on your show to discuss, the easier it'll be to write smart questions. So I do lots of research about the topic I'm discussing, and I really try to find out everything I can about my guest by looking at their website, their social feeds, reading their blogs, etc. Because the more context that I have, the better I am able to determine what's important to ask and also what isn't important to ask. So as you're becoming in the know, you want to notice also what types of things you're looking for while you're researching this person and what's coming up for you. Those can become questions too. So always reference past material. One of the best sources for writing great questions is your guest's past material, their past interviews, their past blogs. Dig into their content so that you know what your guest can talk about. You want to look at their material as a starting point and inspiration for writing questions, and then try to expand upon those and what they've talked about or written about already, and try to elicit a slightly different or maybe a more in-depth response or something that is sort of geared towards your specific audience. So knowing where your guest has been can help you navigate where you can both go together. And you want to think like your listeners. So whether the goal of your show is to inform, entertain, or inspire, putting yourself in your audience's shoes is always one of the most important things to do. And it's the easiest way to come up with brilliant questions because you're thinking about what burning questions do they have and how can you help them solve a problem that they have or better understand the person that you've brought on to really help them. So the focus is on providing value to your listeners when you're writing questions, and it just makes it so much easier when you have them in mind. Okay, so you want to also tell a story. Our brains are wired for story. So a great approach to writing questions is thinking about how you can take your audience on a journey. So you can craft your questions in a way that creates a cadence that's similar to a story arc. For example, the first thing I ask of my guests is to tell me their story. So from the start of the show, my audience is hearing an origin story, and that gives context about the person and then what's coming later in the interview. So it really sets up who the person is, why they're here, and why we're talking to them. Now, it helps connect the dots between the guests and their experience and their advice. Hey friends, We'll get back to the show in just a moment, but I wanted to let you know about the VIP intensive I offer once a month for the busy entrepreneur who wants to start a podcast. So if you know you have something to say that will inspire others, you want to reach new audiences, show up in a bigger way, and make more money, I want to invite you to join me inside my VIP one-day guided workshop, where I'll walk you through creating all the elements of your fabulous podcast. You'll even write your first script and record your very first episode. So if you want accountability, guidance, and dedicated time to start your podcast, go to exploreinu.com to sign up. Okay, my friend, back to the show. So I organized the rest of my questions to lead up to what I think will be the most interesting or important takeaway. And then I kind of wind down and then I ask closing questions that cue listeners to the fact that the interview is wrapping up. So if you listen to other interviews, you can hear that they have this similar approach and cadence to their questions. So writing questions using this approach will keep your listeners engaged and connected to your interview because they are naturally interested, intuitively interested in this storytelling way of interviewing. Okay, lastly, go with your gut. As with everything in life, trust your instincts. So pay attention to how you feel when you're writing your questions. If you feel excited by a question, chances are your audience will too. Writing questions can be a solitary exercise and it can keep us in our heads a little bit, but it's really important to remember that we're simply creating this framework for conversation with another human. So just make sure to check in with your heart too, because your main goal, other than providing value, is to build a connection and to create connection that your listeners can sense and can tune into with their hearts. And it just creates this loop of connectivity. So while great interviews require the host to be curious and generous and a good listener, if you add in a few great questions, you will be able to have conversations that your audience will absolutely love listening to. So I hope you've learned a few tips that will help you to write great questions so that you have really fantastic interviews with your guests. And if you need help in that area, starting your podcast so that you can get these fabulous guests onto your show and talking to you, go to exploreinu.com/podcast, and you'll be able to see where I've included some free resources like a workshop, 3 secrets to starting a successful podcast, and a workbook, a clarifying your podcast vision workbook. These are free tools that I created because as I was going through my own process of creating podcast, the things that I really wanted and needed and wished I had starting out, and I know they can really help you on your podcasting journey. So check those things out. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe so you don't miss a show. And rating and reviewing this podcast is the best way to help support us. Always remember, your voice and what you have to offer is needed in the world. Until next week, take care.